Namaste students, I am Shobha, Science faculty from Mangala Vidya Mandira. Today, let us learn the next chapter in science, that is chapter 8, friction. So before starting this lesson, I'll be asking you some question. Try to answer this. You might have seen a driver of a car or a truck slowing down the vehicle at a traffic signals. Have you seen this? Yes. Have you ever thought why a vehicle slows down when the brakes are applied? Not only vehicles, any object moving over the surface of another object slows down when an external force is applied on it and finally they come to a stop. Similarly, when a person is walking on a smooth surface or a wet floor, it is very difficult for him to walk rather than a little bit rough surface. Why all this happens? This is all because of friction. So let us learn more about this friction in this chapter. So before going to this chapter, let's learn about what is the meaning of friction. A friction is a force that resists the motion of an object or the surface. This frictional force arises when two objects are contact in each other. Only if the two objects are together in contact, then only we can experience this frictional force. And always this frictional force works in the direction opposite to the direction of the object moving or trying to move. So always it slows down the moving object. Whenever the frictional force is there, it will try to slow down. Slow and steady, it stops the moving object. So this is all about the meaning and definition of friction. Coming to the examples of friction, a ball rolling on the ground gradually slows down and comes to rest due to this frictional force. That is because of the friction between the two objects. One is ball, another one is the ground. Similarly, when we stop pedaling a cycle, it slowly stops due to the friction again between the two things or the two objects. One is the wheel of the cycle, another one is the road. Similarly, which we can perform at home only, when you take your two hands and rub the palms of the hands against each other. So because of the frictional force created between these two rough surface, you can see some heat is being produced. Here also the friction plays an important role. So these are the few examples of friction. Let us talk about this force of friction next. So this friction is of different types. One is static friction, sliding friction, and rolling friction. So as you can see students, static friction is a friction where it does not allow the object to move. It will make that object to be in stationary position. That is why it is called as static. Static means at rest. Sliding friction, it is a friction which makes the object to slide, means slide over. One object will slide over another object, that is called as sliding friction. Third one is called as rolling friction. Here the friction makes one object to roll over the another object. Sliding friction example is like when you keep a book on an inclined plane, that is sloping position, the book just comes down. Your slider, what we can see in the playground, the sliding game, that is also an example of a sliding friction. And rolling friction, an example is like you will be having a suitcase with the wheels. Nowadays the suitcase comes along with the wheels in order to carry the heavy weight. So there is a rolling friction acts between the wheels of that suitcase and the surface, or any vehicle, the wheels of any vehicle, there the rolling friction acts. So these are some of the friction. Apart from this, there is a friction that is called as fluid friction, which we will be discussing at the end of this video. So next, as we move, there are different ways to identify the forces, how this frictional force will be created. Friction is nothing but a form of force which is measured in the newtons, just like the other force. So newton is a unit, students. Unit of force is measured in newton. Whenever you are representing it in an name, you should write it as Newton, Newtons, Newton. Symbolically, you should represent it with capital N. So as I have discussed, there are three types of frictional forces: static frictional force, sliding frictional force, and rolling frictional force. Static frictional force, it is a force which acts between an object which is at rest and which is going to come to rest, or from the rest which is going to move. Sliding friction is a frictional force that resists the motion of an object moving across the surface. Similarly, rolling force, it is a force exerted when an object rolls over the other object or other surface. So how friction affects the motion? What are the factors which affects the friction? If you roll a ball along the floor of a ground, it slows down and stops even though no apparent force has been applied to it. The ball slows down because of friction. So no one, if you go and stop the ball also, after some time that moving ball comes to rest. So no one is going and stopping that ball. It automatically comes to rest. That is because of friction. So this is one of the way where the friction affects the motion. Similarly, friction slows down the moving object. Friction occurs when two objects rub against each other. This I said an example of the palms, rubbing of the palms. A car that runs on a very rough roads always slows down due to friction. However, on a smooth road it travels fast. Means at the high speed, because there will be no friction. So there are many chances of accident being happening whenever the roads are very smooth, slippery roads. A smooth surface has a very few bumps, sand, holes. There is a less friction on the smooth surface. A running object can glide or move continuously with very little force in the case of the smooth surface. So let us now come to factors which affects the friction. Friction depends on a material's properties such as roughness, how clean the surface are, and other factors. So the two main factors on which the friction depends are mainly, students, it is the nature of the surface in contact, whether the surfaces are smooth or whether they are rough. Depending upon that nature of the surface, friction will be either more, less, or balanced. And the second thing on which the friction depends, it is how hard is the surface which is used to press together. So whether it is very hard or soft, where the two objects can be pressed. These are the two important factors on which the friction depends. The next one is causes of friction. So how do the friction is caused? Friction is caused due to the interlocking of irregularities between the two surfaces in contact. As we have seen, only if the two surfaces are irregular, means when they are rough, the friction will happen. Whenever the surface is smooth, there will be no friction or very less friction. So whenever they are rough, there will be some irregularities. There will be ups and downs on their surface. When this ups and downs of the two surfaces interlock, they lock up each other, because of this only the friction will be arising. So smooth surface, they have minute irregularities between the two surfaces. If they are rough, they will be having larger irregularities. As you can see it in the picture, there are two objects, the rectangular wooden box and the square wooden box. If you enlarge their very microscopically, if you see, this will be the irregularities which will be shown there. So force of friction is more if the surfaces are rough. So roughness increases, frictional force increases. If the roughness decreases, friction will decrease. Next, there is one concept always it will be said, that friction is a necessary evil. As the term says, necessary evil. Necessary means we require this friction for doing some activities. Similarly, it acts as an evil if we don't require this friction in some activities where it is not useful to us. So let us study this topic under two categories: the advantages of friction and disadvantages of friction. Friction is there which is having two sides where it is positive and negative side. So we'll discuss both the sides. So first we'll go for advantages of friction. With an examples, we'll just list it down. Friction between pen and a paper enables us to write on a paper. So without friction, we can't even write. Friction between our feet and the ground allows our movements like standing, walking and running. So we can't even run, walk or even move without friction. Friction between the surface of the road and the tires of our vehicles allow the vehicles to move without slipping. So if there is no friction, our vehicles cannot move smoothly on the road. Similarly, we'll continue the advantages of the frictional. Friction is useful for many of our daily activities. As we have listed already 3 points, it is possible to hold a tumbler due to the friction between the hand and the tumbler. This is the fourth point. Friction between the feet and the ground help us to walk, as we have discussed already, and the pen and the paper also we have discussed. And it is possible to write even on the blackboard due to the friction between the chalk and the blackboard. Even the driving requires friction. Grooved tire threads allow space for water to be channeled away from the road tire contact point, allowing for more friction in the wet condition. Grooved tire threads means where it will be having some spikes or some irregularities either on the shoes or on the tire, that is vehicle's tire. Whenever the condition is wet, because of that grooved shoes and tires only, either person can walk or the vehicles can move. Even the next one, the same thing. Shoes are designed to increase the friction between their soles of the ground. Sole, that is shoe soles, and the ground. So these are the different examples which happens in our daily life because of friction. So let us move to the disadvantage part. So even though we are having so many advantages, we are also having some disadvantages caused by friction. Friction causes moving object to stop or slow down. First thing, friction produces heat causing wastage of energy in machines. So continuously, if the two parts of a machine continuously works, there will be friction created. Because of this friction, heat will be created. This heat will damage that parts. It will not be useful if it will damage that parts inside that machines. Even it cause wear and tear of the moving parts of the machinery, soles of the shoes, etc. Continuously, if you are using, especially the athletes or sport persons, if you see, they will be wearing the special kind of shoes where they will be having the soles of the shoes will be grooved. Grooved means it will be spiky like thing. So if they are using it continuously, because of that friction between the surface of the ground and the shoes sole, it will just become smooth. After continuous use, that surface becomes very smooth, so that causes wear and tear. The shoes cannot be used continuously. You should use the new shoes after they are being used for a long time. Same thing, similarly in the machine parts or in the automobile tires, you can't use the same tire for a longer period of time. Because of friction, they could have become torn or they could have become old. We have to replace it. So these are the disadvantage of friction. So I have given the list of advantages and disadvantages, whatever we have discussed in the points in the form of a difference, so that it will be useful for you in analyzing this. Please go through the slide slowly. Coming back to the next one, how the friction is related to energy. Friction is always present in any machine with moving parts. So in turn, it is related to some energy. If the machine is small or the force are low, the amount of heat produced by that friction may also be less. That is, it will also be very small. Each time two moving surfaces touch each other, tiny bits of materials are broken off by frictions. So very tiny parts will be torn by frictions in an huge machines. Breaking off bits of materials uses energy. So whenever the inner friction is happening, so it makes use of energy. There is a wastage of energy because of this friction. So now let us move to an idea. So whenever there is some disadvantages of friction, how can we reduce that friction? Is there any way to reduce the disadvantages caused by the friction? So let us study that, followed by how to increase friction. So if we need some friction to be happening in that place for that works to be done, so what are the possible ways where we can increase our frictional rate? So that is what we are going to study. Friction can be reduced by using lubricants like powders or oils or grease. So this you could have used in your many day-to-day activities, like oils and grease you should have used in machine parts. Whenever you can hear some cracking sound or whenever there is a friction created between the two rubbing machine parts, you will use oil or grease. Similarly, powder. So powder can also reduce the friction, like while playing the carom board you'll use that carom board powders to reduce the friction between the two rubbing surfaces. Again, using the rollers or wheels, so that also will reduce the friction. Using ball bearings, this ball bearings are being mainly used in your ceiling fans, bicycles, etc. to reduce friction. In automatic motors and all, ball bearings will be used. So these are the some of the ways where you can use it for reducing the frictions. And coming next to point, unless a force is constantly applied, friction will slow all motion to stop eventually. It is impossible to completely get rid of friction, but we can somehow reduce. So 100% we can't reduce the friction, we can't stop the friction to happen, but somehow we can reduce them. The rate of the friction can be reduced. Similarly, here you can see the two machine parts. One is a roller, another one is a square shaped machine part. It is having an interaction, that is the shaft, that is this entire thing is called as shaft. So because of this roller and this square shaped instrument rub each other, they'll produce some heat. Because of this heat there will be an wear and tear. So in order to avoid this, we will be using that rolling balls. As you can see in the right side picture, that rolling balls will somehow prevent the friction. To some extent it will avoid the friction. So coming to how can we increase the rate of friction, in some cases we need that friction to be increased. So friction can be increased by increasing the roughness of the surface in contact. Just if you increase the surface roughness, automatically the friction increases. The soles of the shoes are grooved to have a better grip on the floor. So new shoes and all, you will be having a good grooving which can help us to walk steadily on the floor. The tires of the vehicles are also even made threaded, means their designs, as you can see, it will be rough, so can helping in having a grip on the road. The brake pads of the vehicles are rough to stop moving vehicles when the brakes are applied. And gymnasts apply some coarse substance on their hands for the better grip. Like while playing and all, students, you can say that athletes or the gymnastic persons, they will just rub the hands with the mud or the sand, so in order to get that grip. So these are the ways where you can increase the friction. So coming back to the last topic, that is fluid friction. What is this called? Fluid friction. It is the force of friction exerted by the fluids and gases on the object moving through them. So it is not solid interaction. Here it is liquid and the gaseous interaction. So even though in the gaseous form or the liquid forms also we can experience this friction. Fluid friction depends upon two things. One is the speed of the object, another one is the nature of the object, another one is the nature of the fluid. Which shape is that? For example, we consider an aeroplane or a bird. So they are also experiencing friction with whom? With the air. And even the fish, the aquatic forms, they are also experiencing the friction. Here one body is the fish, the other body is the water. In the case of air, one body is an aeroplane, another body is the air. So when these two things, rough things, come and rub against each other, friction will be created. So how speed the object is moving, what is the shape of the object, and what is the nature of that fluid or a gas. So all these are the factors on which this fluid friction depends. As I told, example, birds flying in the air have streamlined body to reduce that fluid friction. Fish living in water have streamlined body again to reduce the fluid friction. So this is a common friction which will be experienced by this object which is moving in air and water. The frictional force which is exerted by fluids will be called as drag, and special name is given for them, that is called as drag. The frictional force of an object in a fluid depends upon its speed and also the shape. That you have to remember, students. So coming to the activity, what you have to do regarding this chapter in your project book is the two things. The first thing is, imagine that friction suddenly vanishes. How would life be affected? List 10 such situations. So in this chapter we have understood how important friction is. So because of friction, what are the things we are able to do? So you have to imagine that suddenly friction, somehow it does not happen practically, but you have to imagine that friction is not there, friction does not exist in the nature at all. Then what are the 10 things you would have to face without friction? That you have to make a list. The second thing is, you have to collect the pictures of work which occurs due to friction. So these are the works which will be happening only because of friction. So without friction, these things cannot be happened. So this you have to collect the pictures, or if possible even you can draw it and you can put it in your project books. So better if you draw, it is more creative compared to sticking the pictures. So these are the two activities, students. If you have understood this chapter thoroughly, you can attend these two activities in your project books and you have to submit it. Thank you, students.